This is Herb Winches reporting live from Tuscaloosa, Alabama. I wish with all my heart that the events of this past week would have not have happened. I've reported on hundreds of stories and events dealing with this great man, and covering this event never crossed my mind. Paul William Bryant, affectionately known as the Bear, now belongs to eternity. How we all wish that we could have enjoyed him, his leadership, and inspiration for a few more years. That might be selfish, but that must be the way thousands of Americans and especially Alabamians feel today. Today, in our own personal way, we must all bid farewell to the most well-known and admired citizen in Alabama sports history. Of course, it's a sad time, but time heals that sadness. And the great victories and good times that Coach Paul Bear Bryant brought to all of us can never be taken away. The greatness of this man requires that we report on today's services, and we have taken every measure to ensure that we report on today's events in the best of taste and with admiration and dignity. That is the only way Coach Bryant would want it. As we admired him in life, we admire his family and close friends. Our thoughts and prayers are with each and every one of them today. Good morning, everyone. The scene is this. As I look behind me, the First United Methodist Church here in Tuscaloosa. At this moment, Coach Paul Bear Bryant's body lay in state. The congregation has entered the church about 10 or 15 minutes ago. The church holds approximately 450 people. With me this morning is Tom York, who began his broadcasting career in Birmingham back in 1957. That was 1 year before Coach Bryant returned to his alma mater to take over the coaching program. And Tom, it is indeed a sad day for all Alabamians.
It is, Herb. I noted when we came in it was a cold, fog-shrouded, gray-looking day. It has been all morning since about 7 o'clock when we got here. But if you will note, the fog is lifting and the sun has come out. Just as it did so many times during his lifetime, it seemed that just at the most propitious moment, the sun would shine on whatever activity Coach Bryant was doing. And to reflect also a bit on what you touched on, the propriety of doing such a telecast as this occurred to me as it has, I know, to thousands of you out there. And I weighed the pros and cons of it, and I came up with this conclusion. Having known the man for 25 years, I would seldom ever attribute my thoughts or opinions to anyone else, particularly someone who could not at this time rebut them. However, I could almost assure you that Coach Bryant, having someone ask him if we were going to do this and if it would indeed be proper, I can hear him growl and say, "All right, but do it with class."
We understand that the governor, George Wallace, and his party is arriving at this moment. That is the highway patrolman surrounding the governor's car there as he and his party, the First Lady of the state, Lisa, now getting out of the car to enter the church. There are three churches set up here, are within about 100 yards of each other. As I look across the way, we have a Presbyterian church. That is where the public is invited to hear the services as they go on this morning. That church holds approximately 500 people. As I look down the street here about 100 yards, we have the First Baptist Church of Tuscaloosa. That is where all the dignitaries have now, most of them have arrived and entered the church. And, of course, the main service is directly behind us here at the First United Methodist Church.
Herb, in the First United Methodist Church, the 1982 football team will be there. The family, of course, staff assistants and athletic department workers and their families. There'll be one press representative only, and that is Jack Wheat of the Tuscaloosa News. Governor George Wallace has a party of 6, and there'll be one representative from President Reagan, and 3 representatives from the University of Alabama, and several more close associates of Coach Paul Bryant.
And there is the governor and his party now being escorted into the church.
Herb, you know, Governor Wallace was a very close friend of Coach Bryant, although not exactly contemporaries. they did have a lot of close associations.
The governor, in his learning of Coach Bryant's death on Wednesday, had a very emotional moment. And, of course, he at that time said that all flags will fly at half-staff through Friday and through the funeral this afternoon.
You know, such was the popularity of Coach Paul Bryant, not just with the average football fan, but with the entire populace, that there was much thought at one time given to the fact that Paul Bryant might be governor of Alabama.
A lot of the friends and fans of Paul Bear Bryant arrived here early this morning, as early as 7 o'clock. As Tom has mentioned earlier, it was a very thick fog. It has since lifted, but many of these people gathered here early so they could watch the proceedings, what will be taking place today. The hearse carrying Coach Bryant's body arrived at about 9:20 this morning. We have a shot of that we'll show you right now. This was at about 9:20, about 30 to 35 minutes ago. The casket was draped with red and white carnations, some 2,000 carnations. And the 1980 football team is the honorary pallbearers. And there were 8 players picked out who will tell you in a moment to carry the casket. As you see it being taken out of the hearse here, this was about 20 minutes ago.
Looking around, Herb, I see some very familiar names. Down through the years, Coach Bryant influenced and was influenced by a great number of people. I did meet Carolyn and Ray Perkins, talked to them briefly. His quarterbacks are here, and he was famous for producing quarterbacks. Steve Sloan, now of Duke, Scott Hunter of Mobile, STEADMAN Shealy, Snake Stabler, Major Ogilvy, and all the familiar faces from the past.
There you see the casket being carried into the church. This was about 25 minutes ago, and there are 8 pallbearers, and they are Tommy Wilcox, the defensive back, Jeremiah Castile, defensive back. These are all players off of the 1982 team. Gerald Sprinkle, another defensive back, Eddie Lowe, a linebacker, Walter Lewis, the fine quarterback, Mike McQueen of the offensive line, Darrell White, a split end, and Paul Fields, a quarterback from Birmingham.
There were 3 presidents during Coach Bryant's tenure at the University of Alabama. He came here when Dr. Frank Rose was the president, and who later left to go north, and Dr. David Matthews took over, and then Dr. Joab Thomas in the last one. And they all 3, I suppose, had the greatest respect for Coach Bryant and his ability to get things done and get people moving.
Tom, as we all know, there are literally people from all over the United States paying their respects to Coach Bryant. Many of them traveled great distances to be here for this occasion today, and one of those is a gentleman that very, very close to Coach Paul Bear Bryant, and that was Charlie Thornton for so many years, the sports information director here at Alabama. He now is at Texas A&M with Jackie Sherrill, and Charlie was one of the first people to arrive here this morning, and we got some thoughts from Charlie.
When I came here, I was a young, immature person, and I learned how to be a man. I hope I did from him. He taught life, and he taught so many things. And the last day or so, with so many former players and associates back, we've all been telling more stories and really kind of rejoicing in the fact that we were able to be a part of all of it. I think that's the way he would have wanted it. But I don't think there's ever been a man in the field of athletics who has touched as many lives in a positive fashion as Coach Bryant did.
So, such a talented man. What one characteristic stood out above all those? It had to be one characteristic.
Oh, I think just the one characteristic that I personally feel like, and it runs through a thread of talking to people, that you always felt like if you didn't do your very best, that he would know it. And that Tim Davis had a line the other day. Somebody said that when you do something good and somebody tells you Coach Bryant had been proud of you, he said no, Coach Bryant would have expected it. And I think that's the way all of us kind of felt. He motivates you with an intangible thing. I think that was he was the greatest motivator of all time.
The the day of the Liberty Bowl up in Memphis, I said something to him about, Coach, asked him, would he have done anything different? And he said he would have won more ball games.
Yeah.
Do you think that's a fair assessment?
Oh, yeah, I guess so. I really think, that the reason they keep score is to see how many you win. I know that, but in Coach Bryant's case, that's not the important thing, what he did for people. And, of course, he had to win the games in order to get the mystique about him and be the legend and all he was. That's a byproduct of it, but the impact he had on people's lives, I'm talking about children and everybody, and there's millions of people that he has impacted so favorably that he made everybody a better person by being around him and being able to be a part of it.
Probably one of Coach Bryant's closest friends, Charlie Thornton, now at Texas A&M, for so many years here at the University of Alabama.
He worked so very closely for about 18 years with Coach Bryant right here at Alabama. He tried to leave a couple of times and only finally succeeded last year. Some of the dignitaries who will be here and will be in the Baptist Church, as you might suspect, this will only hold about 450 people in the Methodist Church behind me, but the Baptist Church over there will hold about 600. And there are at least 400,000 people who would like to be here, who are here in spirit. And perhaps that's our function today, is to try to convey some of the spirit of this gathering to you through television. That Baptist Church will hold about 600. Many expected dignitaries are George Allen. I have seen Woody Hayes this morning, Leroy Jordan, Gene Stallings, Bobby Dodd, Jerry Claiborne, Fran Kersey, Cliff Hagan, Joe Namath, Jack Hicks, Richard Todd, Bob Hope, Keith Jackson from ABC, Congressman Ronnie Flippo, Billy Varner, his longtime friend and aide, Boyd McWhirter, Dr. Boyd McWhirter, the Commissioner of the Southeastern Conference, Congressman Tom Bevel, and all the SEC coaches. And Herb, I also saw one friend of his whom we've heard quite a lot of, too, is the former athletic director at the University of Notre Dame, Moose Krause.
Now you're looking at the Presbyterian Church. That is only about 75 to 100 yards away from the Baptist Church as well as the Methodist Church, and this is the church provided for the public. A lot of these people arrived here early this morning to sit in on the services, and that church holds about 500 people.
Herb, I know that some people may not have known the chronology of events that led up to this. Would you start back with when you got word, you were down here Tuesday morning at the university, weren't you?
I came down at, Wednesday morning, Tom. It happened Tuesday evening when Coach Bryant took ill at about 6:30. He was at a friend's home. He was immediately admitted to the Druid City Hospital here in Tuscaloosa. And I came down about 7 o'clock Wednesday morning. And I talked personally with Dr. William Hill, interviewed him, and he assured me that Coach Bryant was chipper, that he was cajoling with the nurses. He was asking for some juice. He was asking for a morning paper. And everything was fine as of 8:30 Wednesday morning. At about 11:30, he suddenly took a turn for the worse, and at 12:24 is when he suffered the massive coronary and was pronounced dead at 1:30. And, of course, it's the rest is history.
Yes. This service, which will be conducted in the church behind us, the First United Methodist Church, for those of you who knew Coach Bryant casually, there were a lot of doubters. He had his critics. He had some severe critics. But he was indeed, if you knew him closely enough, a very religious man. This will be a very religious service conducted by First United Methodist minister, the Reverend Mr. Joe Elmore, and the Reverend Dr. Duncan Hunter. Dr. Hunter is retired and only works part-time at the church. Elmore is the pastor now and has been for 6 years. Hunter was his minister for 6 years previously. And assisting will be Associated Minister Joel Raines. Now, Dr. Hunter told us that the service will be very brief and religious in tone. The family has requested that no music be played or sung. As I said, it will probably be brief, under 30 minutes. Simple and straightforward, not at all flamboyant or dramatic, and it will reflect the family's wishes.
Another gentleman very close to Paul Bear Bryant for so many years is his assistant head coach, defensive coordinator Ken Donahue, who will be staying on and working with Coach Ray Perkins. In fact, when Coach Perkins succeeded Bear Bryant, the first person that he asked to stay was Ken Donahue. Donahue and Bear Bryant had a very special relationship. In many ways, a lot of people mistook Ken Donahue sometimes for Bear Bryant. They both had the same type of mannerisms, very straightforward, very candid. And Ken Donahue, of course, it's a very traumatic moment for him, and we talked with him earlier today.
Well, I'm going to remember a lot of things about him. Dedication to a lot of young men, probably more than anything else. And going to remember that burning desire to win, even right on down to his last ball game.
A lot of people were talking about his last day when they were talking about his health. Early reports were that he was fine. Were you surprised when the news came?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Just the day before, of course, he was in the office, running up and down the hall, same as always, feeling good. And we all knew that he'd had some health problems for the last 2 or 3 years, but didn't realize it was serious.
That intimacy that he had with his players and coaches, it had to be something special. You'd ask him what he said to a team at halftime, and he'd say, well, I'm sorry, I just can't tell you that. That had to be a big part of his makeup.
Yes, sir, it was. He felt like a lot of things between he and the players was personal, and didn't feel like his public is actually what he said to the players before the game or at halftime.
If Ken Donahue could have Bear Bryant remembered in such a way by the people of Alabama, could you phrase it for us?
Well, I really couldn't. I ain't got the vocabulary to really do that. Really, a great coach, one of the greatest coaches of all times, and there'll never be another coach like him, I don't think. Nobody can fill his shoes. He'll be remembered in football as long as they have football, probably.
That was Coach Ken Donahue, defensive coordinator here at the University of Alabama. You're looking at the First United Methodist Church just across the street from where we are located, and the service, we understand, is now underway. It's 10 o'clock. The services, as Tom had mentioned, will be very brief, in length about 30 minutes. Mary Harmon Bryant, Paul Bryant's widow, has requested that it be a very simple service, and indeed it will be a very simple service. Tom, I think there were a couple of psalms that Mary Harmon had picked out, her favorite psalms. We all know that she's a very religious woman, and she requested that no music at all be played in this service, and only a couple of psalms to be read today.
That is part of the service. This is a time, of course, for tears and for sweet memories for all the people who came in contact with the man. He did not coast or float through life, Herb. He picked it up, he gripped it, and he wrung it out like he would a washcloth. Life was something to be used, to be taken charge of, and he did it. And in doing so, he set the example, and he molded thousands of others to that same philosophy. His secret, as someone has said, was that when you talked to him, he touched your life in that you had a feeling that you absolutely could not let him down. Whatever it was that he needed, you would have to do it for him. And this is embodied in some of the service that is going on now in the Methodist Church behind me. For those of us who were kind of close to him, these are difficult times, and from time to time I may have to stop occasionally, Herb. But one of the things that Jack Perry, the SID at Alabama, told Herb and me was that the service would include the 23rd Psalm, which is probably a favorite of all. And if I may, I'll try to read that. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever.
A eulogy, a very short eulogy, will be delivered by the Reverend Joe Elmore later on in the service. Mr. Jack Perry, the Sports Information Director at the University of Alabama, has made copies of the eulogy, which we'll be reading to you later on. As you see now, the family of Coach Paul Bear Bryant arriving at the church, the entire Bryant family. Survivors include wife Mary Harmon, Paul Bryant Jr., daughter Mae Martin Tyson. Coach Bryant had 5 grandchildren. Mark Bryant Tyson, whom he had a very, very special relationship with. They were fishing buddies. Mary Harmon Tyson, Anna Laura Bryant, Stella Gray Bryant, Mae Martin Bryant, his son-in-law John Tyson, his daughter-in-law Sherry Hicks Bryant, and Coach Bryant's 3 sisters, Bessie Goolsby, Mrs. Lee Carey Hatcher, and Mrs. Marvin Frances Hopkins. There you see the Bryant family now being escorted into the First United Methodist Church as the services are just about ready to get underway. At the request of the family, there are only 2 speakers for today's service. The eulogies will be delivered by, as I mentioned, Reverend Joe Elmore of the First United Methodist Church and Dr. Duncan Hunter. No cameras, no tape recorders, nothing allowed inside the church. We certainly respect and understand those wishes. However, media has converged here in Tuscaloosa from all over the United States. All 3 networks are here. All the cable channels, all, of course, local media from Birmingham and from all over the state of Alabama and Southeast. Coach Bryant, a very public person.
I saw one of the great sports writers of the world, Associated Press's Will Grimsley, who had done so many Coach Bryant stories through the past. It's just a tribute to the stature of the man who had what I call a magnificent obsession. Just as some people are so dedicated to the medical profession, to the clergy, then he had dedicated his life to the proposition that you could build young men through football, and he did.
One of Coach Bryant's very special players, he had, of course, they were all special, but one that he recently got close to was STEADMAN SHEALY, the fine quarterback who led Alabama to a national championship a few years ago. STEADMAN, a very religious young man himself, and he was called upon yesterday at the memorial service held in Memorial Coliseum. More than 6,000 attended that service, including the Bryant family. STEADMAN was called on to deliver a eulogy, and we have that for you right now.
You know about Coach Bryant from what the media reports, from maybe the limited contact you've had with him. I was very fortunate in that I was one of his quarterbacks, and I was fortunate enough to wondering that I'd like to consider a friend of Coach Bryant's. And because he loved you, the students of the University of Alabama, the faculty of the University of Alabama, and just the people here in Tuscaloosa.
I understand that we had some audio problems with the tape of STEADMAN SHEALY, but it was a very moving moment yesterday at the Coliseum as he spoke for approximately 5 minutes and talked about what the man Bear Bryant had done for him and his life and his career, which, of course, there are numerous of people that Coach Bryant has touched throughout his career. 25 of those years spent right here in Tuscaloosa. We might mention, Tom, that it's a very somber moment, as you might expect, as a lot of the crowd, just spectators, as we look across the street at the Methodist Church. There is no audio system. They had first talked about having a speaker set up to the outside for those who would like to hear the services. And then at the very last moment, the family decided against that. But still, everyone here, it's a very somber moment.
There are thousands of people gathered around this block as far as you can see back to my right and to my left and behind me. They're fans, people who may never have met Coach Bryant. And there are thousands of people in that category. There are equal thousands of them who did not know the true stature of the man. Here is an American folk hero, a legendary figure in the form of a General Patton or a John Wayne. And we in Alabama are so close to things. What is the expression? So close to the forest we can't see the trees, or vice versa. We were unaware that we had among us a man of this stature. His regard in these United States, and indeed the world over, is one that Alabama can take particular pride in, because he's brought great fame, as George Wallace said, to this state.
I understand that we do now have the STEADMAN SHEALY, the eulogy that he delivered yesterday at the memorial service. We'll try to run that tape again for you right now. STEADMAN SHEALY.
You know about Coach Bryant from what the media has said and from maybe the limited contact you've had with him. I was very fortunate in that I was not only one of his quarterbacks, and I was fortunate enough to coach under him, but I like to consider a friend of Coach Bryant's. And because he loved you, the students of the University of Alabama, the faculty of the University of Alabama, and just the people here in Tuscaloosa and around, I want to take a moment and share some personal experiences about Coach Bryant that will maybe enlighten you a little bit as to the man he really was. Coach Bryant taught me a lot. He taught me how to be a champion. He prepared me not only to be a football player, but he prepared me after football. And he also taught me what a complete person was. I'll never forget, in our meetings together every year, he'd talk about what is a complete person. He'd always say you must develop physically, you must develop mentally, and you must develop spiritually. And the spiritual aspect of the complete person is what I'd like to expound on in the next just few moments. I guess I'll always remember the prayer Coach Bryant prayed at the Liberty Bowl after the ball game. I always saw a couple of people over from him on my knees, and he was on his knees, and I'll never forget that prayer. Because you see, you're talking about the greatest coach that ever lived, a man that had accomplished everything, a man that had completed a mission, but he was not too proud to get on his knees before Almighty God. It's like a little child. And I'll never forget what he said. He said, "Lord, thank you for allowing me to be a part of football, to be a part of this team, to be a part of the university for these many years." And it meant so much to me personally, because you see, Coach Bryant gave credit where it was due. He gave credit to Almighty God, to the Lord of Lords and the King of Kings. A little over a year ago, I went in Coach Bryant's office, and there were many times we would talk about spiritual matters. We would talk about the Bible. We would talk about prayer. We would talk about Jesus Christ and a relationship with Him. And I was shocked one day because I walked in there and we were talking about prayer, and he said, "Stedman, you know what?" He says, "I probably pray more than you do." He says, "There's not a time that I don't see a person that's handicapped or disabled or has problems that I don't pray for them." You see, that revealed to me the kind of man Coach Bryant really was. A man that cared about little people, people that others overlooked, but they meant a lot to him. Coach Bryant told me right after he retired, he said, "Steadman, I want to become a better Christian. I want to become a better Christian." I was so thankful that God prompted me to come over here on Tuesday. I was going to come yesterday and to visit with him. And I walked into his office and we began to share some, and I said, "Coach, thank you for what all you've done for me. Thank you." And I know that's your feeling today. And I know if he were standing before us today, you'd want to go, "Coach, thank you for what all you've done for me." I know his present players would say that. I know his former players would say that. I know his coaches would say that. Because you see, he gave us something very few people can give. He gave us a part of himself, because he was the example of a complete person. He matured physically, he was mature mentally, and he was mature spiritually.
STEADMAN SHEALY, former quarterback at the University of Alabama. Services, we understand, have now begun in the First Methodist Church located directly behind us. In the church, of course, it includes his family, survivors, the 1982 Crimson Tide football team, the football staff, Coach Bryant's assistants, athletic department workers and their families. There is one press representative, Jack Wheat of the Tuscaloosa News. He is acting as a pool reporter. And after today's services, all of the media will gather with Mr. Wheat. And, of course, he will then at that time disclose exactly what took place in this morning's services. We showed you earlier Governor George Wallace arriving with his party. One representative from President Reagan. He was scheduled to be here, however, could not make it. He sent George Allen, the new head football coach in the United States Football League Chicago Blitz. George Allen representing President Reagan. 3 representatives from the university. They were not disclosed to the media. 2 close associates of Coach Bear Bryant. And that should leave about 50 spots in the church, and those spots were filled first come, first served basis, and most of those, I'm sure, were taken up by ex-ball players and honorary pallbearers. Dr. Boyd McWhorter, representing the Southeastern Conference, the commissioner of the SEC, he is also in the First United Methodist Church. The First Baptist Church, which is located only about 50 yards and directly across the street from the First United Methodist. This is honorary pallbearers, dignitaries, legislative guests, and, of course, media. Then the Far Church, the First Presbyterian Church, that is for the public, and most of those started gathering here this morning at around 7:30, 8 o'clock, as that church seats about 500.
Herb, you might suspect that for active pallbearers, they may have had volunteers in the hundreds, particularly from those who play football for him. But those active pallbearers were selected by lot. They drew lots, and they were selected by lot, by chance. And they are Jeremiah Castile, the senior from Phoenix City, Alabama; Paul Fields, the junior from Gardendale; Walter Lewis, the junior from Bruton; Eddie Lowe, a senior from Phoenix City; Mike McQueen, a junior from Enterprise; Gerald Sprinkle, a senior from Chamblee, Georgia; Darrell White, a senior from Tuscaloosa; and Tommy Wilcox, a senior from Harahan, Louisiana.
And the pallbearers were voted on by the football team to serve here today.
Herb, in the service going on behind me now, we were supplied a text by the Reverend Joe Elmore, and without going over it completely, with apologies to the Reverend Joe Elmore and your indulgence, I will share a few of those thoughts that is going on right now with them. These are his words. The Lord is God. He made us, and we belong to Him. For this hour and every hour, there is no truth more fundamental, more meaningful, more relevant, more certain. It declares the value and eternal worth of human life. It's the foundation of the psalmist's affirmation in response to the question, what is man? Namely, you have made him little less than the angels and crowned him with glory and honor. The Lord is God. He made us and we belong to him. Today, in a special way, we affirm and celebrate this truth for a very special man, Paul W. Bryant. Much has been and will be said of him, and rightly so. For now, the word to be said is the simple yet profound truth from the Scripture. He is a child of God. Therefore, enter the temple gates with thanksgiving. Go into its courts with praise. Give thanks to him and praise him. We enter this temple of worship with thanksgiving to God. The life which the Lord has made and claimed as his own, he blesses. One of the clearest teachings of the Bible is that God blesses his people through people. He spoke to Abraham saying, I will bless you and make you a blessing. So it has been in every age with men and women, great and small. God blesses them and makes them a blessing. Our thoughts today are of one person the Lord blessed and made a blessing. We give thanks to God for Paul Bryant. We give thanks to God for his long years of influence on young people, challenging them to excellence, discipline, confidence, and hard work. We give thanks to God for his love of life, his caring, his down-to-earth goodness. We give thanks to God for his ability to teach and motivate people, to teach them important lessons for life. That we must never get too proud to pray, that to be a man is a matter of character and class, that the number one goal in life is to be a human being. We give thanks to God for his personal strength in leading men and the tenderness with which he could touch a child. We give thanks to God for his, and the sentence is completed in a multitude of ways in your minds and hearts, and those of millions of people near and far. We give thanks to God for Paul Bryant. Psalm 100 closes with words that represent our deepest assurance and hope for life and death. The Lord is good. And how often did Coach Bryant speak of the good Lord? His love is eternal. His faithfulness lasts forever. In life and death, this is our assurance and hope. Those were the words of Reverend Joe Elmore, pastor of the First United Methodist Church in Tuscaloosa, Alabama.
Of course, we have talked about the special relationship that Coach Bryant had with his players. He kept that a very private thing. He never let the media be involved in any of the meetings that he would have with his players. But when you could get the players off to themselves, of course, they would tell you about things, about this man, how special he was and how he touched their lives. And I don't think that you could talk to any football player, former football player of Bear Bryant, that individual couldn't tell you that man very influential in their life and any success that they may enjoy. One of those players is enjoying success in Mobile, Alabama. He's now a sportscaster, a former great quarterback here at Alabama, and later played for the Green Bay Packers. His name is Scott Hunter, and we talked with him earlier this morning.
Scott, I know it's a tough morning for everybody, especially those directly connected with the program here. What are you going to remember most about the man?
Not so much the games, I don't think, being on the field during the games. They sort of took care of themselves, and memories for those. I'll miss the walking around in front of knowing he's not doing it anymore, walking in front of the team and winding his watch and talking about mom and daddy and those type of things. I'm just going to miss coming up here and going to practice and him grinning at you and asking you about what you're doing now. I'm just going to miss all that.
What was his greatest attribute as a coach, his greatest characteristic?
It's been said 1,000 times before. He probably instilled more character in more men than any one man's ever done in this country.
Obviously, he had a huge impact on your career, in your life.
Oh, sure. He's always looking out for you. He called me last spring, talk about television broadcasting, sports broadcasting. CBS was picking up college football at that time. And should I be interested in that type of thing? He's always had an angle for former players.
Can you recall Any anecdote, anything humorous that's happened that you probably never forget?
He put his arm around me one time coming off the practice field, and I was a redshirt sophomore, and he said, "I want you to be fair this week." And it just struck me. I didn't know what he was talking about, the word fair. Have I cheated at practice? Have I done something wrong? And then he went in and explained, he wanted me to portray Mike Fair, the South Carolina quarterback, because I threw a lot like he did and throw against the defense. But my heart was beating so much, my ears were pounding, I didn't hear what he said. That was just something that you drew up there, you know. It's just hard to bring up anecdotes right now.
Were you surprised at his passing? It came down obviously with pain the night before, but early newspaper reports said he was going to be okay, and all of a sudden he's no longer with us.
Well, in the back of all our minds, I believe, was the idea that this might happen when he got out of coaching, and it did. Thank you, Ron. Okay.
There are literally hundreds of former players who played under Coach Bryant who are attending today's services, and I know it'll be virtually impossible for those players to get together and reminisce and talk about the great man, Paul Bear Bryant. And there will be a reception in Birmingham for all former Alabama football players. It'll be hosted by the 1st and 10 Club from 1:30 to 4 o'clock at the Birmingham Hyatt House following today's services at the Elmwood Cemetery. We understand now that the services are over. The bells have begun to ring here in Tuscaloosa. The pallbearers have made their way out of the church. Looking across the way, we see Gerald Sprinkle on the right-hand side, the defensive back. The services have just concluded.
And just according to Mrs. Bryant's wishes, it has been brief. And as we mentioned earlier, in the First Methodist Church here, only about 450 people can be seated in there. And perhaps as many as 600 in the Baptist Church across the way for the dignitaries, and an equal number in the Presbyterian Church just 1/2 block down the street.
The Reverend Joe